Men have become the tools of their tools, wrote Henry David Thoreau in the 19th century, a line that has grown heavier with each passing decade. If he could stand among us now, would he recognize in our glowing screens the culmination of that prophecy? Or would he recoil, astonished at how willingly we surrender our attention, as if it were an inexhaustible resource, rather than the essence of our humanity? We imagine ourselves free, but our hands move almost involuntarily toward the phone, the screen, the endless scroll. Here lies the paradox of our time. In a world where knowledge is everywhere, wisdom becomes increasingly scarce. In the Enlightenment age, philosophers like Kant asked whether humanity would ever emerge from its self-imposed immaturity. Today, the question might be reframed. Will we ever escape the perpetual adolescence of distraction that technology so deftly cultivates? What is distraction but the postponement of depth, a deferral of meaning, a resistance to the solitude in which genuine thought takes root? William James, the father of modern psychology, defined attention as the taking possession by the mind, in clear and vivid form, of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects. To take possession implies sovereignty, yet we have become tenants in our own mental houses, with landlords unseen but powerful. Our attention is no longer ours, it is rented out in tiny parcels, sold to the highest bidder, by platforms whose business model depends not on what we think, but on the fact that we cannot stop thinking in their direction. Neuroscience adds a harsher clarity. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of anticipation, fuels the endless loop of checking, refreshing, and scrolling. Each ping of notification is a promise, rarely fulfilled, yet potent enough to bind us again. Our brains, sculpted over millennia to respond to novelty as a survival signal, now fire with the same urgency at the trivial as at the profound. A rustle in the bushes once meant predator or prey. Today it means a new message, a like, a headline, none of which threaten survival, yet all of which command a response. Primitive circuitry does not discern context, it only demands vigilance, and vigilance without purpose becomes fatigue, a form of self-erasure. This transformation is not accidental. In earlier epochs, technology was a tool. Today it is an ecosystem, one designed not for our flourishing but for our captivity. Consider the words of Blaise Pascal. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The architects of modern platforms have weaponized this inability, converting our restlessness into revenue. Where monks once cultivated silence as the highest discipline, we cultivate noise as the default condition. And yet silence is not absent. It waits, obscured beneath layers of interruption, accessible only through deliberate rebellion. History reveals the magnitude of the shift. The printing press expanded human horizons. It did not shrink them. The telegraph compressed distance, but still delivered information in digestible cadence. Radio and television commanded collective attention, but so at a rhythm that allowed for shared experience. Digital technology differs in kind, not merely in degree. It fragments time itself, it interrupts thought not once or twice in an evening but hundreds of times a day. In such conditions, continuity of reflection becomes almost impossible. What was once the exception, distraction, becomes the norm, and what was once the norm, deep focus, becomes nearly impossible. The consequences stretch beyond the personal into the political. If attention is the foundation of autonomy, then the erosion of attention is the erosion of freedom. Surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff describes, thrives on predicting and directing behavior. To capture attention is to shape desire. To shape desire is to mold action. The distracted citizen is the citizen subdued, incapable of the sustained engagement that democracy requires. Hannah Arendt warned that totalitarianism thrives not only on lies but on the corrosion of reality itself. What is the feed, endlessly curated and personalized, but a corrosion of shared reality, a privatization of truth itself? The metaphors grow dark. Once the psyche was compared to a garden, cultivated through discipline, watered by attention, and guarded against weeds. Now it resembles a marketplace in perpetual uproar, voices clamoring, merchants calling, distractions hawking their wares. The cathedral of the mind, with chambers of stillness and echoes of the sacred, is drowned by the carnival of notifications. The city of the self is besieged, its gates unguarded, its citizens scattered by the constant trumpet of alerts. And yet, like Rome before the fall, we mistake decadence for vitality. Consider too the cost to creativity. Every great leap of art or science required solitude, the capacity to linger with a problem or a vision long after the novelty faded. Einstein spoke of combinatory play as the essence of discovery, a wandering of the mind that required time unbroken. Virginia Woolf argued for a, quote, room of one's own, not only for women, but for thought itself. In contrast, our age offers no room, only a corridor of doors endlessly opening into new distractions. To create under such conditions is to resist not merely laziness, but an entire economic order. And relationships? Simone Weil, the philosopher of attention, declared that, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. To attend to another human being is to grant them dignity, yet generosity requires sacrifice, the surrender of one's wandering mind to the presence of another. What happens when that capacity itself is atrophied? A conversation interrupted by the reflexive glance at a phone is not merely a social lapse, it is a diminishment of love itself. We outsource presence to the device, mistaking connection for communion. Distraction, then, is not trivial, it is existential. Kierkegaard described despair as the sickness unto death, the misrelation of the self to itself. Distraction is its modern cousin, a perpetual postponement of that encounter with one's own soul. To be distracted is not merely to lose time, it is to lose the possibility of depth, and when billions live thus, the condition ceases to be personal and becomes a civilizational one. The danger is subtle, because the theft occurs in increments. No tyrant confiscates our books, no edict silences our thoughts. Instead, we are invited gently and seductively to surrender them, one notification at a time. The genius of the system is that we are accomplices to our own captivity. We swipe willingly, we refresh eagerly, we trade autonomy for novelty, unaware of the exchange until years have passed and the silence within us has grown alien. What then becomes of a culture so conditioned? History offers warnings. Rome's decline was hastened as much by decadence as by invasion. Bread and circuses sufficed to distract the populace from political decay. Today the circuses are digital, infinite, personalized. The barbarians need not storm the gates. They arrive through signals invisible, welcomed as companions, trusted as guides. The empire crumbles not with a crash, but with a swipe. To speak thus is not to reject technology but to unmask its terms. We are speaking within the very medium we critique, and that paradox cannot be ignored. The challenge is not abstinence, but awareness. Not rejection, but reclamation. Attention is the cornerstone of freedom, the currency of love, the seed of creativity. To surrender it without resistance is to abdicate the very qualities that make us human. We are not yet irretrievably lost. The silence waits, patient, eternal, offering itself still as the only space in which the mind can rediscover its depth. The question that remains is whether we will turn toward it, or whether we will remain like Thoreau's lamented men, forever enslaved by our tools. The age of distraction is also the age of decision. The choice is not between technology and tradition, but between mastery and enslavement. Will we reclaim the cathedral of the mind, or allow it to be permanently converted into a marketplace? If attention is the currency of consciousness, then memory is its treasury. Yet what becomes of memory in an age where every fact lies a click away, every conversation is archived, and every moment is photographed, but rarely lived? We confuse storage with remembrance, access with wisdom. Hannah Arendt once wrote that the thread of memory binds us to the world, granting continuity to human existence. But distraction frays this thread until life itself feels fragmented, a collage of impressions without narrative. The danger is not merely that we forget, but that we cease to experience in the first place, outsourcing recollection to machines, and thereby eroding the very material from which meaning is woven. Modern neuroscience confirms what philosophers intuited: sustained attention is required for memory consolidation. Without it, experience dissolves before it takes root. Consider the student who studies with notifications buzzing, the worker who half listens to a lecture while scrolling. The hippocampus, that ancient seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain, requires focused presence to bind events into memory. Without presence, learning becomes shallow, knowledge superficial, and what then becomes of a society that cannot remember deeply? It becomes vulnerable to manipulation, swayed by the latest headline, incapable of discerning continuity. George Orwell feared that censorship might erase memory. Aldous Huxley feared that distraction might render it irrelevant. Between them, we find our predicament. Identity, too, becomes fragile under the weight of distraction. The self is not given but built, constructed slowly through reflection, narrative, and choice. To be perpetually interrupted is to be perpetually unfinished. The philosopher Charles Taylor described the modern self as a buffered identity, one in constant negotiation with external pressures. But what happens when those pressures are not occasional but relentless, delivered through curated feeds, designed to amplify envy, outrage, desire? The self begins to mirror the feed, reactive, fragmented, restless. The question, "Who am I?" dissolves into, "What am I reacting to now?" In such conditions, authenticity becomes elusive, for the self is shaped more by algorithms than by introspection. The cost is both spiritual and psychological. Across traditions, from the meditations of Marcus Aurelius to the teachings of Zen, focus was seen as a path to transcendence. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," wrote Aurelius. Yet in our time, the very power over the mind is outsourced to forces indifferent to our flourishing. Spirituality requires stillness, the capacity to dwell in silence, to attend to the eternal. But how can one attend to eternity when trained to refresh every 30 seconds? The sacred is drowned in the shallow. Our temples are not desecrated by invaders, but abandoned by congregants too distracted to enter. One might object that technology also delivers access to wisdom. The writings of sages are available instantly. Guided meditations are streamed across continents, and philosophical dialogues are democratized. And this is true. But abundance without discipline becomes noise. The Stoics counseled that philosophy was not merely to be read, but to be lived, digested slowly, and practiced daily. To scroll through fragments of wisdom without embodying them is akin to feasting visually, while starving physically. The medium encourages consumption, rather than transformation. Desire itself is reshaped. Where once human longing reached for transcendence, such as beauty, truth and love, today it is redirected toward the consumable and the immediate. Algorithms track every hesitation, every pause of the thumb, and from these micro-gestures they sculpt desire. To want becomes less an act of will than a reflex triggered by design. René Girard's theory of mimetic desire, the idea that we learn what to want by imitating others, finds new force in the digital age. The curated lives of influencers become mirrors, in which we measure our own inadequacy, fueling cycles of envy and purchase. Desire, once a compass pointing toward the higher, becomes a leash tethering us to the marketplace. And what of morality under these conditions? Moral reasoning requires time, the ability to step back, to weigh, to deliberate. However, distraction accelerates the response, rewarding outrage and penalizing patience. Online discourse thrives on instant judgment, the flash of anger, the dopamine of indignation. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum reminds us that compassion requires imagination, the capacity to enter another's world. Imagination demands space. Without space, empathy shrivels, and moral discourse collapses into slogans. We become tribes of reaction, incapable of the very deliberation upon which justice depends. The consequences echo in politics. A distracted citizenry is easily swayed, easily pacified, easily divided. Totalitarian regimes once sought to control information. Now, they need only amplify distraction. Bread and circuses have become memes and notifications, sufficient to occupy attention, while power consolidates unnoticed. When Plato warned of democracy's susceptibility to demagoguery, he could not have foreseen algorithms delivering demagogues directly into the palm of each hand, yet the principle remains. A society that cannot sustain attention cannot sustain freedom. Let us return to the individual. For civilization begins in the soul. What happens to the inner life under perpetual interruption? The answer is both banal and profound. We lose the ability to be with ourselves. Blaise Pascal centuries ago observed that, quote, "The sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room." If this was true in 17th-century France, how much more in a world where solitude is colonized by constant connection? We are terrified of the silence, for in silence the self appears, demanding confrontation. Better the distraction of triviality than the abyss of self-knowledge. And so we flee, endlessly, until we no longer know what we flee from. The psychological toll manifests in anxiety, depression, and restlessness. Studies confirm what common sense already knows. Multitasking erodes focus. Constant alerts heighten stress hormones, and sleep is fractured by blue light. Yet beyond the metrics lies a deeper malaise. We are unmoored. Our days blur, our nights numb, our minds never still. We chase novelty as if it were nourishment, yet remain perpetually hungry. T.S. Eliot captured it with chilling prescience. We are distracted from distraction by distraction. To live thus is not to live fully but to skim existence, and yet, the spiral deepens further still. For distraction is not merely imposed, it is chosen. We seek it, we invite it. Why? Perhaps because distraction spares us the weight of existence. To attend deeply is to risk pain, to confront mortality, to engage responsibility. Distraction anesthetizes. It shields us from the real, at the cost of the meaningful. Nietzsche warned that when the abyss gazes back, we tremble. Easier then, to glance away, to scroll, to binge, to flee. The abyss remains, but unseen, it feels less threatening. Thus, distraction becomes not only a hijacker but a refuge, a perverse sanctuary from the very truths that could liberate us. Is there escape? The traditions of old suggest so. The Stoics cultivated focus through daily reflection. Monks structured their lives around silence and prayer. Yogis disciplined body and breath to harness attention. These practices were not luxuries but survival strategies, for they recognized the fragility of the mind. We moderns imagine ourselves stronger, yet we are perhaps weaker, for never has temptation been so omnipresent, so personalized, so persistent. To reclaim attention now requires more than nostalgia. It requires deliberate rebellion. Thus, the spiral of distraction tightens around us, shaping memory, identity, desire, morality, and spirit. The danger is not abstract. It is the erosion of the very capacities that make us human. If we cannot remember who we are, then who are we? If we cannot focus, what can we create? If we cannot dwell in silence, how can we encounter the divine? The age of distraction is not merely an inconvenience, it is an existential crisis disguised as entertainment. And like all crises, it demands recognition before it permits resolution. civilizations rise not only on armies and economies, but on the invisible scaffolding of attention. Without sustained focus, laws cannot be written, art cannot be created, science cannot be pursued, and justice cannot be defended. When the collective mind dissipates, the structures built upon it falter. The historian Arnold Toynbee argued that civilizations collapse not from conquest alone, but from a failure of creative response to challenge. In our time, the challenge is clear. Can humanity muster the discipline to master its own inventions, or will it dissolve beneath the weight of its self-inflicted distractions? To answer, we must turn once more to history. Consider the fall of Athens after its golden age. Distracted by spectacle and factionalism, the polis that gave birth to philosophy and democracy squandered its unity. Rome too grew decadent, trading civic duty for the narcotic of entertainment. Bread and circuses pacified a restless populace, until the empire crumbled from within. We flatter ourselves by imagining we are different, armed with data and technology. However, in truth, our distractions are more potent, pervasive, and insidious. Where gladiators once filled the amphitheater, now infinite feeds fill the mind. Where emperors once sought to pacify the masses with grain, now corporations pacify us with dopamine. The form has changed, but the principle remains. Distraction is the soft corruption of greatness. Yet history also offers glimmers of resistance. The monastics of the Middle Ages preserved knowledge through the silence of scriptoriums, while the world outside roared with chaos. Renaissance thinkers wrestled with the flood of new information made possible by the press, and sought methods of ordering, indexing, and reflecting. The modern age need not repeat ancient decline. It can emulate ancient resilience. But resilience requires recognition. To deny the depth of the crisis is to surrender before the battle has even begun. And the battle is not fought only in institutions. It is fought in the intimate theater of the mind. Each decision to pause before reaching for the phone, each choice to read slowly rather than skim, each act of presence with another human being, these are small revolutions. They may seem trivial, yet aggregated, they form the resistance necessary to preserve autonomy. Attention is reclaimed not in grand gestures, but in daily disciplines. To choose stillness is to choose humanity. The imagery returns, as it must, to the cathedral of the mind. Imagine it, vast and vaulted, its silence echoing with possibility. At its center burns the flame of awareness, steady when sheltered, but flickering when exposed to the winds of distraction. Each notification is a gust threatening the flame, each indulgence in triviality a crack in the walls. To guard the cathedral is to guard oneself, to recognize that the sacred lies not only in churches or temples, but in the capacity of the human mind to dwell fully in the present. If we surrender this capacity, we surrender the sacred itself. There is, however, a temptation to nostalgia, to imagine salvation in retreat. Abandon technology, renounce screens, flee to forests. Yet such retreat is neither feasible nor necessary. The challenge is integration, not rejection. Technology is not inherently corrupt, it is indifferent. It magnifies intent. It can educate as easily as it can distract, connect as easily as it can divide. The danger lies not in the tool, but in the unexamined surrender of mastery. Living in the digital age requires the wisdom to discern, the strength to resist, and the courage to choose. Without these, the cathedral collapses into a marketplace, its silence drowned forever. And what of the next generation? Children raised on screens inherit not only distraction but dependency. Studies reveal shrinking attention spans, increased anxiety, and diminished patience. Yet we must resist the easy condemnation of youth. They are not weak, they are conditioned. It is we who have built the world that trains their minds toward fragmentation. The responsibility is collective. If we fail to model depth, how can we expect them to discover it? If we fail to defend stillness, how can we expect them to value it? Education, then, must become more than the transfer of information. It must become the cultivation of attention. To teach a child to read deeply, to reflect patiently, to create quietly, this is no luxury. It is the very work of preserving civilization. The spiral deepens still. Beyond politics, beyond psychology, beyond education lies the existential core. What does it mean to be human in the age of distraction? To be human is to attend, to choose, to create meaning. Strip away attention, and what remains is automation. Reflex without reflection. Impulse without intention. The danger is not that machines will think like humans, but that humans will live like machines, programmed by algorithms, driven by stimuli, and devoid of depth. The apocalypse may not arrive with explosions but with endless scrolling, and yet, within the spiral lies the seed of awakening. Recognition itself is a form of resistance. To name distraction as hijack is to loosen its grip. To pause in awareness, even briefly, is to reclaim the throne of the mind. The ancients knew this. "Be present in all things," wrote Maya Angelou, echoing wisdom that transcends ages. The mystics counseled attention to breath, to silence, to the eternal now. Their practices were not quaint relics but survival strategies for the soul. Perhaps the modern human must relearn what was once instinct. That to dwell deeply is to live fully. Thus we arrive at the threshold of warning. If we continue unchecked, we risk a future not of tyranny imposed but of humanity diminished. A culture of distraction breeds citizens incapable of democracy. Artists incapable of creation. Lovers incapable of intimacy. Souls incapable of transcendence. The stakes could not be higher. To lose attention is to lose selfhood. To lose selfhood is to lose civilization. The age of distraction is, ultimately, the age of decision. But the decision is subtle, implicit rather than proclaimed. It is made each time we choose whether to read slowly or skim, whether to linger in silence or fill it, whether to converse face to face or glance at a screen. It is made in the shaping of habit, the structuring of days, and the courage to resist the easy and embrace the meaningful. No manifesto will save us, no decree will enforce reflection. Only the quiet revolution of individuals reclaiming their minds can alter the course. And so the call is not shouted but whispered, not imposed but invited. Reclaim your cathedral, guard the flame, attend to the silence that still waits beneath the noise. For in that silence lies the depth from which all wisdom flows, the strength from which all freedom is born, the love from which all meaning arises. The question is not whether technology will hijack the mind. It already has. The question is whether we will awaken in time to reclaim it.